And welcome, everybody, to Broadway in Chicago Backstage with a look at the newly revised musical Working, based on the book by Studs Terkel. This show has been called the Working Man's Chorus Line, which makes sense. It takes us from an American workday, from the Monday morning blues to the second shift blahs, as I've heard it described, with workers from every aspect. It's going to be amazing, and welcome to this show. And we are coming to you from the beautiful Broadway Playhouse at Water Tower Place. Welcome, everybody, theater lovers in the audience here today. Our audience is filled, of course, with performers and students and people, but we have a special group here today, and I wanted to acknowledge them, and that is the students from the Theater Conservatory at Chicago College of Performing Arts at Roosevelt University. Welcome, students. And your head of the musical theater program, Louise Perez. Welcome as well. Let me introduce my guest to you that we're going to have this conversation for about this great show, Working, which will be in Chicago and is in Chicago. First of all, joining me, you do remember him from Wicked. He is the wonderful Wizard of Oz. On Broadway, he created the role of Paul in Big the Musical. He's been in films like Birdcage, TV shows like Home Improvement, and Drew Carey, one of Chicago's favorites, three-time Jeff Award winner, Gene Wiegand. She has appeared on Broadway, off-Broadway, national tours. You've seen her in Mamma Mia, Nonsense, every theater in Chicago area, the Goodman, the Steppenwolf, Court Theater, Northlight, on and on, Hairspray, Caroline or Change, fabulous in that. Welcome, Ife Butler. He is the director of Working, but he also directs, creates, and produces a variety of musicals, most recently the revival of Jacques Brella's Alive and Well and Living in Paris, seen on Broadway and also in the West End in London. He conceived Pirates, or Gilbert and Sullivan Plundered. He reconceived Baker's Wife with the great Stephen Schwartz, and he himself has appeared on Broadway in How to Succeed in Business and Grease. His musicals, new musicals, include Disney's Believe and a new project coming up called Ben Folds Project. Welcome the director, Gordon Greenberg. One should never use the word living legends lightly at all, and I don't use it lightly. In fact, it probably doesn't say enough about my next guest, who started his career by writing a show called Godspell, followed up with Pippin and the Magic Show, and then maybe just this little show, this one of the biggest shows ever around the world, called Wicked. He co-adapted Working. His film credits include Pocahontas, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Prince of Egypt, and Enchanted, a book about his life called Defying Gravity, the creative career of Stephen Schwartz from Godspell to Wicked, and his first ever opera opens called The Seance on a Wet Afternoon by the New York City Opera this spring. Please welcome a living legend, Stephen Schwartz. Stephen, let's start with you. We're going to focus in on Working, but I love Godspell, Pippin, Corner of the Sky, classic stuff. But what I want to ask you about, your later work, Wicked, and even Working now in the revision, seems to me deeper, more sophisticated. Am I reading that right?
I don't know, you live and learn, I guess, and I just write about and deal with the things that are of interest and concern to me. And I guess as my appreciation of the world gets maybe more nuanced, then that comes into the work as well.
One last question before we get into Working itself. I mean, you share this era. Your name is said right along with Stephen Sondheim and Kander Ebb and Andrew Lloyd Webber, these great people. Can you talk a little bit about how musical theater exists today as opposed to when you even began 30, 40 years ago?
Well, I think, we're still trying to do the same thing, which is basically tell stories and talk about the things that we care about and use the vehicle of music and theater to do that. You know, obviously it's gotten a lot more expensive to do things, and that makes things more challenging. But you know, for me, the basic goal has always been tell a good story.
Gordon, on reworking you said that Stephen gave you free rein to go back to the original book, so you brought him a big stack of index cards. And you spread them all over the living room. I did my homework, and you said, how about this? He reshuffled them and said, how about that? You reshuffled them and said, well, how about this and that? Talk to me about the creative process of this.
Well, it always involves index cards. Stephen taught me that years ago.
Index cards, that's the whole secret.
This is a show that I actually first did when I was 12 years old at Stage Door Manor summer camp. Music directed by Janine Tesori, who wrote Carolina Change. And that was my first opportunity to get to know and fall in love with this material. So years later, when Stephen and I were working on Baker's Wife, I brought up working and how much I loved it and how much I believed that it was very relevant. And our first...
What remains possible?
I've got 8,000 more questions to ask you, but we have audience members that want to ask you questions as well. And so let's hear from some of the folks in our audience, and we'll go out for our first question.
Hi, my name is Katie Campbell, and this question is for Mr. Schwartz and also Mr. Greenberg. I was wondering, as a young artist, how would you suggest that someone who is interested in composing and also writing for the theater, how you would suggest that someone break into that field?
The best thing to do is to write something. Which
it's a good start.
And I know that seems facetious, but actually that's true. For myself and for others I've known, what we had was a show that we'd written or some songs that we'd written that we could make a demo of, etc., and then start showing them around. And almost always the break that you get is not that that particular show or that particular song is going to lead to something, is going to be the show that gets performed or the song that gets recorded, but that's what can create interest in you, and then someone may say, well, maybe you'd like to come and write songs for Godspell, or maybe you'd like to write a song for this singer or whatever. So it's really important to, you know, to have a calling card that you can show to someone. Because if you just say, well, I'm a writer, and they say, well, what have you written? And you say, well, I haven't written anything yet, but I want to be a writer, that's not the same as saying, why, here are some songs I've written. That's a very helpful way to get noticed and to get started.
Thanks, Don.
Hi, I'm Brianna Aguilar. My question is for...
And welcome back to Broadway in Chicago Backstage, a look at the newly revised musical Working, playing at the Broadway Playhouse at Water Tower Theater. This is going to be a very special treat because you are going to have some performances by the cast of this show. They've only been in rehearsal for a few days, so we're getting a look at working while it's working. But we're going to start off with a very special treat, and that is a performance by the creator of all of the music, or most of the music in this show, and Stephen Schwartz. The song you're going to be performing, Gene Wigan already said, is one of the most beautiful ballads we've heard, called Fathers and Sons. My question as I toss to you is, this is a song that almost didn't make it in the show. It's very personal to you. I know there's sort of 4 generations of Schwartzes that triggered this as a song for you, but give us a little bit about the birth and use of Fathers and Sons, and then please welcome Stephen Schwartz, Fathers and Sons.
Thanks. Well, as you've heard, so many of the people who spoke to Studs and who figure in the show spoke about how important not just their jobs were, but what they could give to the generations that followed, their children. The steel worker who sings this song in the show said that. Ife mentioned the cleaning woman, and on and on. So this was an important theme, but when I wrote the song, I snuck in some stuff about my own life. And that felt like cheating a little bit to me, so at first I wasn't going to put it in the show, but then the cast kind of browbeat me into it. And but it really does spring from what the people that Studs spoke to actually said. So this is the song Fathers and Sons, which is sung in the show by the steelworker.
working. Barbara Robertson, Ife Butler over there, G. Wygant, cast members. My thanks also, director, Mr. Greenberg. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Schwartz. Mark Hartman on piano as well. If you have ever worked a day in your life, you need to see Working. BroadwayInChicago.com for tickets. Our thanks to Broadway in Chicago, to Comcast for making this happen, and to our studio audience. Thank you so much. I'm Paul Lisnick. Goodbye from Broadway in Chicago Backstage.